Welcome to the podcast. I'm Shira Schoenberg. Massachusetts state government has received a massive pot of money, $5.3 billion, from the Federal American Rescue Plan. Lawmakers have begun to hold hearings on how to prioritize spending this money, which has been described as a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Here with me today to talk about the Senate's priorities are Senate President Karen Spilka and Senate Ways and Means Chair Michael Rodrigues. Thank you for joining me. President Spilka, unlike past COVID relief bills, which were more narrowly tailored to public health needs, the ARPA money can be used for a wide range of uses over several years. Big picture, what are the major areas where you're hoping to spend the money?
Well, I thank you, first of all, for doing this and having Chair Rodrigues and me today to talk about the ARPA money. And I just want to start out by saying that we all want what's best for the Commonwealth, and we may disagree on some of the specifics, but a lot of the general areas are in agreement. But I do want to note that between Chair Rodrigues and myself, we have a lot of experience guiding fiscal stability in Massachusetts. I was Senate Ways and Means Chair for 3 years. The Chair Rodrigues has been in that capacity for several years now as well. Over that time, we significantly built up the rainy day fund. And I am proud of the fact that we had, all that rainy day fund money, so that when we had the budget for last year, 2021, and waited to do it, there was definitely wisdom in waiting. The state of Massachusetts did not have to cut or make drastic cuts in the areas of the budget. Instead, we were able to double down and add and invest in key factors that were being hardest hit by COVID. So I believe that the wisdom in waiting applies here as well. There are areas that we may have some general ideas, clearly the general needs. I think that we would agree that there will be some investments in housing and climate. Structural inequities are critically important. I think there was testimony at the hearing last week or this week about the differences in home ownership or UI rates, unemployment still with people of color versus white. So, we need to invest in these areas to help our low-income families, our middle-class families, workers and families, our intergenerational childcare that I've been talking about with childcare, elder care, and care for folks with disabilities. Mental health and public health, behavioral health are areas that we need to invest in. Education, higher ed, broadband are all areas in need. And there's so many needs in Massachusetts, but we want to be thoughtful. We want to hear from folks. We want to hear from people in our communities and the district, because we want to make sure this is not the only pot of money Massachusetts has gotten or will be getting. We've gotten tens and hundreds of millions of dollars already that have flowed directly to Massachusetts, many to state agencies, housing, economic development, education and childcare, transit, and other, that some of it is still not spent by the agencies. Some of it we still have waiting. When we get FEMA reimbursement, that will be another pot of money for Massachusetts to spend. This $5.3 billion reflects less than 10% of the total dollars that we will be getting. So we need to make sure we don't duplicate efforts. If we get an infrastructure bill from the federal government and Massachusetts again gets tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, we want to make sure that we spend the infrastructure or transportation dollars on infrastructure and transportation and save the ARPA money for areas that does not duplicate the funding, but we save it. We have 5 years to spend that money. So we believe that taking a little bit more thoughtful, inclusive approach is the way to go.
And obviously, you've been focused on this wisdom of waiting. And one reason I think you're stressing that right now is because Governor Baker has been pushing you to get some of the money out quickly. I know you've talked about this need for a deliberative process. The governor has said that there are urgent needs now, things like job training for unemployed residents. He argues that projects like housing take time to get built. So maybe I'll bring in Chairman Rodrigues now. Do you share his sense of urgency? And why does the legislature disagree with the governor's push to get some of the money out now?
I don't think we necessarily disagree with the governor's push. I will argue that we already put a lot of money into those areas in the FY22 budget. If you look at the budget that the governor just signed a short while ago for fiscal year 22, we invested $17 million in the Workforce Competitiveness Trust Fund. We invested $18 million in career technical initiatives, $15 million in community empowerment and reinvestment grants, $24 million in youth works. We knew months ago that the additional unemployment insurance benefits were going to expire in September, and that we had to prepare our workforce development and workforce training programs, prepare them for this influx of new clients, if you will. So we've made those investments. Being collaborative and thoughtful and inclusive and smart and patient on how we spend that money is going to pay us big dividends in the long run. We know, and we've heard from Evan Horowitz at our hearing. We heard from Michael Goodman at our hearing that Congress designed this ARPA funding in a way that we don't have to commit to what we're spending until the end of calendar year 24. We don't have to spend the dollars till the end of calendar year 26. They designed it that way so we would be thoughtful and deliberative and ensure that these investments have the biggest impacts on the long term in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I'm certain that there are going to be other areas as we go through this listening process and having these hearings that we're going to identify that need investments sooner rather than later. We will address those sooner rather than later, but we don't need to spend over half the money right now when we have years in which to invest this money. And we're coming off a budget where we've made significant investments in many of these areas.
And so far, the concrete proposal that's out there for spending the money is the governor's, and that's pretty typical. The governor will put out his proposal, then the House will come out with theirs, then the Senate will come out with theirs. So what Governor Baker wants to do is he wants to take $2.9 billion, put $1 billion into housing, another $1 billion into infrastructure, and use the rest for a variety of areas like tourism, job training, addiction treatment. President Spilka, do you think the governor is focusing in the right place, or would you have other priorities?
Well, I believe that many of the governor's areas of focus will be areas that the legislature wants to focus on as well. The ultimate amounts may not differ a little bit. The process or procedures, the specific areas that we put it to within, say, housing, we all recognize we need more housing construction. One of the biggest problems that prevents more housing construction is zoning reform, and the Senate has taken a real lead in making changes in zoning reform to enable us to build more houses, so more homes for folks, working folks. So I believe that it's not always money that needs to be looked at, but I think that there will be areas. Again, the governor puts money towards some areas of resiliency and fixing culverts for one specific. I know we have some culverts, so it's stuck in my mind that many areas you don't normally think about culverts, but as I mentioned, there is an infrastructure, a mega billions of dollars infrastructure bill that literally is coming down the pike. So will there be funding in that bill for culvert and resiliency? There may well be. So my hope is that we don't spend the ARPA on areas that we get specific funding from the federal government from. As I mentioned, speed is a factor, but we heard clearly in the hearings that speed cannot and absolutely should not be how we measure success. As I mentioned, it's not the only pot of money. We have so many other areas. There is money specifically going into housing, some federal pots of money specified for housing and housing stability, childcare, transit, and other infrastructure. I think that it's important that we take the time to utilize this once in a lifetime opportunity to invest in bold and transformational change in our communities. And we take that responsibility seriously. I would like to just add and thank you, take a moment to thank you for your recent series on how many cities and towns are planning on using their ARPA funding. And I greatly appreciated you highlighting that many communities are taking similar inclusive approaches that we in the legislature are in terms of how they should best spend their ARPA funding. For example, it's noted there that New Bedford and Revere are surveying their residents and holding focus groups on how best to spend the money. And Lynn is working to create a process for the public to have input in how to best spend. So it's clear that it's not just the legislature. Many others believe that it's taking the time to make thoughtful allocations that reflect the true interests of our public is really the way everyone or many are approaching this amazing opportunity.
And Chairman Rodrigues, from a fiscal perspective, this is one-time money. Does it make sense to use it for one-time expenditures? I'm thinking things like building projects, paying back the unemployment insurance trust fund, or how do you avoid putting it into programs that are then going to obligate you to more state spending when the federal money runs out?
Great question, Sharon. Absolutely, we need to be thoughtful and responsible on how we invest this money, that we don't create structural deficits going forward, so that we create programs or expenses that need to be sustained by budgets in the future. So we are very much focused on infrastructure investments in one-time expenditures. And, we appreciate the governor's proposal. And I say we, I mean, Chairman Michaelowicz and I are working very, very closely together on this. And as we have for the past, almost 2 years now through this pandemic, we are in constant communication with one another. We certainly have our agreements and some of our disagreements, but we've worked very, very closely together. We invited Governor Baker and Secretary Heffernan to our very first hearing in order to hear their proposal. We plan on building upon their proposal. And we want to ensure that, this is really once in a lifetime generational changing opportunities that we're going to have with these dollars. And we want to do it right, and we will do it right.
Okay. One fundamental question is, do you use this money to expand what works, to put money into programs that already exist, or do you try to make some kind of systemic change, things like beginning to provide universal pre-K? President Spilka, what do you think about that?
I agree that these one-time funds we should be looking at bold transformational changes in our communities and our state. And that is way we are looking. We may end up using some of it to do more, behavioral health areas, for example, expanding some of that. But even with that, maybe, and this is just an example of it, some of it may be able to be used to expand the number of beds across the state in behavioral health, mental health, that we all know we need, and we don't have the seed money to do it in the way that we all need it to happen. So, but I think some of this is looking at and hearing from folks in all areas, hearing from the advocates, hearing from other senators, hearing from the reps, in the House. It's very important that we incorporate the feedback. I also the Senate has the new Reimagining Massachusetts Post-Pandemic Resiliency Committee that Senator Hines is chairing up. I want to make sure that we incorporate the feedback from those very important hearings and discussions surrounding these decisions. So I think a lot of this should be for big, bold, transformative ideas. But again, and we look forward to hearing from people. There will be more hearings in the fall. And then I anticipate working closely with the House in particular. The Speaker and I have had some great discussions as well. And, to see starting at some point in the fall, beginning to allocate some of the funding. Again, speed is a factor, but it should not be how we measure success. Success should be measured on what the outcomes are to these investments.
And this question, it's an important one, so I want to ask it of both of you, which is the pandemic really highlighted the longstanding needs that exist in the Black community and in the Latinx community in particular, where factors like crowded housing, less access to healthcare and transportation, a concentration in essential jobs really made these communities much more vulnerable to the pandemic. I know you've both talked about the importance of equity. I want to ask you both, how do you envision using the federal ARPA money to help minority communities?
I guess I'll jump in first. I think, first of all, by listening to minority communities, we've had conversations just yesterday with BECMA, and we want to ensure that we hear, especially from those communities that were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, by the Black and Brown communities, the minority communities, and the Senate President mentioned earlier, we already have the facts, the statistics that the unemployment rate amongst the minority community is 2 to 3 to 4 times higher than that of the non-minority community. So it's by, once again, doing what we're doing, being deliberative, being inclusive of the community, and listening to their ideas and their thoughts on how we can best impact that community.
Yeah, I think I would highlight and echo what Chair Rodrigues just said. Again, listening is probably the most important thing that we in the legislature can do so that we actually send funds to the targeted areas that the communities of color believe are the most impactful with this funding. As I mentioned, we do know that there are needs in housing, healthcare, workforce development, clearly, and many other areas, but how that trickles down to be specifically what kind of programs for housing would be most helpful, what kinds of workforce opportunities, should it be an expansion of the community college workforce training, a 2-year program, certificate programs. I think that these are the types of things that we want to hear so that we know when we do appropriate the funding that it goes to the areas that the communities of color will be most impacted by, positively impacted, and they believe are helpful.
And I'll start with Chairman Rodrigues on this. what kind of public transparency and checks will you have on how the money is spent? For example, will the final decisions on how it's spent be made openly? Will there be any kind of online tracker on where the money is going? How does the public have confidence that you're spending this in a transparent manner?
We're going to continue in the Senate what we took the lead on during this last budget deliberations, where we included a section that requires all of the federal dollars be posted on an open web-based information for any members of the public to see exactly where these dollars are spent. We will spend it, I assume, that we'll conduct a similar process that we do with our operating budgets or our supplemental budgets or any spending bills. That first the House will vote on something, and then the Senate will vote on it. It will be open and transparent and public, and we will build in whatever tools are necessary to ensure accountability, and so that the public, the taxpayers of the Commonwealth, can see for themselves that the dollars are spent exactly as they were intended to.
President Spilka, transparency?
Well, I would commit to all the provisions that the chair just committed to. I think that it's important that not only we in the legislature know that the funding actually goes to the intended purposes, but the public as well. So all of the spending there should be a clear dashboard on the administration's website as to where the money's being allocated, how much of it is spent, where it is spent, how much of it is left, so that anybody could pursue that and look at it online. I do just want to add, though, another thought, that in terms of spending the ARPA funding, generally, this is what the legislature does. In the past, generally, the legislature, as you know, appropriates. The governor puts out his budget, a proposed budget, in January. The House does theirs in April, the Senate in May. And then in June, the House and Senate negotiate their budgets. The governor's is certainly a guide and has a lot of great proposals, many of which may be taken into account in the House or Senate budget, but not all. And it's up to the House and Senate to decide what goes in each of their budgets, and then negotiates the final budget that is signed by the governor and finalized that way. This is pretty similar. The governor is putting forth a proposal. His spending more than half of the 5.3. He got 200 million to spend. He spent 186 of it already. 75 million was spent on the legislative priority of paid emergency leave for workers, and a few other things. So his proposal spends, a decent amount, more than even half of this funding. We'll take that into account, but like we do in hearings and listening to advocates and others across the state, when we have budget hearings, the House and Senate will appropriate, and certainly will be working with the governor, and then he and his administration will implement like in the budget. So this is a typical budget process that is done non-emergency time. We are no longer in the state of emergency, the major state of emergency at the height of COVID. We are no longer in the rescue situation where money needed to be spent urgently and quickly. We are now in recovery mode and back to the more normal budget type of appropriation process.
So, final question for both of you, starting with Chairman Rodrigues. Looking back 10 years from now, what will be your measure of success on whether this ARPA money was well spent?
Whoever's sitting in my seat 10 years from now would comment that when the legislature had the opportunity to invest this $5 billion of one-time dollars, they did so in the right way. They did so in a way that ensures that today, 10 years later, we're able to witness the results and the impacts of those investments on better quality of life for all of the citizens of the Commonwealth, and that, in fact, we did realize a true equitable recovery from the pandemic.
Madam President?
I would hope that 10 years from now, whoever is looking back during this time period and these coming years will be able to see concrete, tangible, positive results of the investments that we make in terms of really transformational change, major decrease in structural racism and increase in equality in all of the areas that we know need to be touched upon, major increases in quality of life for all of our residents, no matter what age they are, what background they come from, whatever zip code they live in, just a real transformative, positive change for our Commonwealth.
And you can read more on commonwealthmagazine.org. Senate President Karen Spilka, Senate Ways and Means Chair Michael Rodrigues, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Shira. Thank you.